October 15, 2023, Cascade National Forest. Margaret Chen had 30 seconds to decide whether to trust an 8-year-old girl or call it in to headquarters. The child stood barefoot in the morning mist, blonde hair matted with pine needles, clutching a torn photo of Victor Schwarzenegger. "That's my daddy," she whispered. "Bad men took me." Maggie's radio crackled. Dispatch reported no missing children, no Amber Alerts, no worried father calling police. But the girl's eyes told a different story. The same hollow look Maggie remembered from 8 years ago, before the botched rescue, before 3 children died, before she ran to these mountains to forget. What happened next would either save them both or destroy the last piece of Maggie's shattered conscience. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maggie's finger hovered over her radio's transmit button. Standard protocol demanded she report the child immediately. Location, condition, claimed identity. But something in the girl's trembling posture made her hesitate. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Maggie kept her voice soft, the way she'd learned during 15 years of talking people off ledges. "Emma." The girl's grip tightened on the photograph. "Emma Schwarzenegger. The bad men said my daddy wouldn't pay, so they were going to hurt me real bad." Maggie crouched to the child's eye level, noting the fresh bruises on her wrists, the torn designer clothes that would cost more than Maggie's monthly salary. If this was a hoax, it was an elaborate one. "How long have you been out here, Emma?" "I don't know. It got dark, then light again. I heard them looking for me with flashlights, so I hid in the hollow tree like Daddy taught me." The girl's voice cracked. "But they're still out there. I can hear them calling my name." Maggie's blood chilled. She'd been conducting her morning patrol for 3 hours and hadn't encountered anyone else on the trails. The nearest road was 12 miles through dense forest. No casual hikers, no campers. If men were hunting this child, they knew these woods well enough to stay invisible. Her radio squawked again. "Ranger Chen, please respond to your location status." "This is Chen, conducting routine patrol, Sector 7. All clear." The lie came automatically. She clicked off before dispatch could respond. Emma flinched at the radio static. "Are you calling the bad men?" "No, honey. I'm a ranger. I protect the forest and everyone in it." Maggie studied the photograph in Emma's hands. The image showed Victor Schwarzenegger, unmistakably the action star, embracing a blonde girl who could indeed be the child standing before her. But something about the photo nagged at her. The edges looked too clean, too perfect for a kidnapped child to have carried it through the woods. "Emma, do you remember where the bad men took you? What the place looked like?" "A cabin with a red door. And there was a big lake, but it smelled funny, like rotten eggs." The girl's description was vivid, specific. Sulphur Springs. Maggie knew 3 locations within 50 miles that matched. The sound of distant voices drifted through the trees. Male voices, calling a name that might have been Emma. "Get behind me," Maggie whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her sidearm. The Glock 19 felt foreign after 8 years of using it only on aggressive wildlife, but muscle memory kicked in as she drew the weapon, safety off, barrel pointed toward the ground. The voices grew closer. At least 3 men, maybe 4, moving with the deliberate pace of a search grid. Professional, organized, not your typical backwoods criminals. Emma pressed against Maggie's legs, trembling. "Please don't let them take me back." Every instinct screamed at Maggie to call for backup. But backup was 40 minutes away on the nearest mountain roads, and these men would find them in 10. The girl's terror was real, whatever else might be fabricated. "Emma, I need you to listen very carefully. See that rocky outcrop about 30 yards east? There's a ranger cache hidden behind the boulder. Can you get there quietly?" The girl nodded, her fear giving way to a kind of grim determination that seemed too mature for 8 years old. "Good. If anything happens to me, you press the red button on the emergency beacon inside. Then you wait for help." Maggie handed Emma her backup radio. "Keep this, but don't use it unless you absolutely have to. What about you? I'm going to have a conversation with these gentlemen." The voices were close enough now to make out words, spread out. She couldn't have gone far, Boss wants her back alive. The accent sounded Eastern European, possibly Russian. Maggie waited until Emma reached the cache before stepping into a small clearing where the approaching men would spot her first. She holstered her weapon but kept her hand near it, adopting the casual stance of a ranger conducting normal duties. The first man emerged from the tree line 60 seconds later. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing expensive hiking gear that looked fresh from the store. His eyes swept the clearing with practiced efficiency before settling on Maggie. "Good morning, officer." His English was accented but polite. "We're looking for our daughter. She wandered away from our campsite last night. Lot of worried fathers in these woods lately," Maggie replied evenly. "Description?" 8 years old, blonde hair, wearing a white dress. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Very frightened child. We're extremely concerned." 2 more men flanked him, trying to appear casual but moving with military precision. All 3 carried day packs that bulged with more than hiking supplies. "Haven't seen any children this morning," Maggie lied smoothly. "But I'll keep an eye out. You folks have permits for overnight camping in this sector? Ready for tomorrow's chapter?" Hit that follow button because what Maggie discovers next will change everything you think you know about this story. The lead man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Permits? Of course. Though in our concern for our daughter, we may have left the paperwork at base camp." His fingers drummed against his thigh, 5 quick taps that looked like a signal. Maggie caught the movement in her peripheral vision. The other 2 men had shifted positions, creating a subtle triangle formation. Standard containment protocol. These weren't frantic parents, they were operators. "Base camp's a good distance from here," Maggie observed, her voice carrying the patient authority she'd perfected during countless hostage negotiations. "This sector's restricted during nesting season. Most folks don't know about the trail access." "We're experienced hikers," the man replied. "My name is Dmitry Volkov. Perhaps you know my family? We have business interests in Seattle." The name meant nothing to Maggie, but the way he said it, like dropping a card he expected her to recognize, made her skin crawl. 8 years of dealing with drunken campers and lost tourists hadn't dulled her instincts for reading predators. "Can't say that I do." She pulled out her citation book, buying time to think. "I'll need to see some identification. Standard procedure for anyone in restricted areas." Dimitri's companions exchanged glances. The shorter one, a wiry man with prison tattoos visible beneath his rolled sleeves, touched something at his hip. Maggie's training catalogued the movement. Quick draw position, probably a concealed carry. "Officer," Dimitri squinted at her name badge. "Chen, surely a missing child takes priority over paperwork?" "Missing children are exactly why we have protocols, Mr. Volkov." Maggie's pen hovered over her citation book. "Kids get turned around easy in these woods. Most of the time they're found within a mile of where they wandered off. What time did you notice she was gone?" "Early this morning. Maybe 6 a.m. Maggie glanced at her watch. 9:43 a.m. "That's nearly 4 hours. You call it in to local authorities. We wanted to search ourselves first. You understand? Family matter." Family matter. The phrase triggered a flood of memories Maggie had spent 8 years suppressing. Another family matter, another scared child, another moment when protocol and instinct diverged. The last time she'd trusted her gut over procedure, 3 children died, and her career ended in congressional hearings and leaked recordings that painted her as a rogue agent who'd prioritized emotion over evidence. But Emma's terror had been real. The bruises, the way she'd flinched at every sound, those weren't details you could fake. "I'll radio this into the sheriff's department," Maggie said, reaching for her radio. "They'll want to coordinate search and rescue." "That won't be necessary." Dimitri's voice lost its polite veneer. "We simply need to know if you've seen the child." The forest around them had gone unnaturally quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals. Even the morning breeze had stilled, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Maggie recognized the silence, predators in the territory. "Like I said, I haven't seen any children." She kept her stance relaxed, but shifted her weight to the balls of her feet. But I'll be sure to keep an eye out during my patrol. The tattooed man spoke for the first time, his accent thicker than Dimitri's. How long you been ranger here? Long enough to know these woods pretty well. Maggie's hand drifted toward her radio. And to know when someone's not telling me the whole truth. Dimitri stepped forward, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying that didn't belong in the wilderness. Miss Chen, I think perhaps you don't understand situation. This is very valuable child, worth much money to right people. And to wrong people? His smile returned, cold and practiced. There are no wrong people in this business, only those who cooperate and those who make things complicated. The threat hung in the morning air, like smoke from a distant fire. Maggie felt the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and calculation flooding her system, the same mixture that had once made her the FBI's most successful hostage negotiator, and later, its most spectacular failure. Gentlemen, I think this conversation is over. She keyed her radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Chen requesting immediate backup at grid reference. The tattooed man moved faster than she'd anticipated, his hand clamping over her radio before she could finish the transmission. Up close, she could see the crude letters inked across his knuckles, SMIRT, death in Cyrillic. Now that, Dimitri said softly, was complicated. The metallic taste of adrenaline flooded Maggie's mouth as she calculated distances and angles. 3 men, triangle formation, one with his hand on her radio. The tattooed man's grip was firm but not crushing, professional restraint, not desperate violence. Yet, remove your hand, Maggie said, her voice carrying the ice-cold authority that had once talked armed gunmen into surrender. Now, the tattooed man glanced at Dimitri, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The hand withdrew, but he remained close enough to strike again. Much better. Dimitri's smile never wavered. You see, Miss Chen, we have mutual problem. You want to do your job, protect the forest. We want to find valuable property that belongs to our employer. Perhaps we can help each other. Maggie's thumb found her radio's emergency beacon, a silent alarm that would bring every available unit racing toward her position. But even as she considered pressing it, a new sound cut through the forest silence. Her satellite phone was ringing. The electronic chirp echoed off the trees with startling clarity. In 8 years of ranger duty, that phone had rung exactly 17 times, all routine check-ins or weather emergencies. No one called her. No one had reason to. Dimitri's eyes sharpened with interest. Popular lady. The phone continued its insistent buzzing from her belt. Maggie's hand moved toward it automatically, then stopped. Something was wrong. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. The only people who had this number were her supervisor, the state emergency coordinator, and her blood turned to ice water. Answer it, Dimitri said softly. It wasn't a request. With trembling fingers, Maggie pulled the satellite phone from its holster. The caller ID showed only a number, but she recognized those digits. They were burned into her memory from 1,000 sleepless nights. Part of the nightmare that had driven her into these mountains 8 years ago. Deputy Director Marcus Webb. FBI. The man who had destroyed her career. The man who had buried the truth about the Caldwell case so deep that even congressional investigators couldn't dig it up. The man she'd trusted with everything, until she learned exactly how far his definition of acceptable losses extended. Miss Chen? Dimitri's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your phone. Maggie's finger hovered over the answer button. Webb hadn't contacted her since the day she'd signed her resignation letter and walked out of FBI headquarters in disgrace. Why now? Why here, with 3 armed criminals standing in a triangle formation around her and a kidnapped child hidden 30 yards away? The answer hit her like a physical blow. Webb wasn't calling by coincidence. He was calling because he knew she was here. He knew about Emma. He knew about the men surrounding her. He was involved. The phone rang one more time before Maggie forced herself to answer. Chen. Hello, Maggie. Webb's voice was exactly as she remembered. Smooth, cultured, carrying just enough warmth to seem genuine. It's been too long. Not long enough. She kept her eyes on Dimitri, who was listening with obvious interest. What do you want, Marcus? Straight to business. I always admired that about you. Webb's chuckle felt like spiders crawling down her spine. I understand you've encountered some visitors in your neck of the woods. Thought you might appreciate some context. Context. The Schwarzenegger girl is part of an ongoing federal operation. Highly classified. The gentlemen you're speaking with are assets working under Department of Justice oversight. The words hit her like a sledgehammer. Maggie's vision grayed at the edges as 8 years of carefully constructed defenses crumbled in an instant. The Caldwell case, 3 dead children, a botched rescue that Webb had ordered her to lead despite her objections, evidence that had mysteriously disappeared, witnesses who had suddenly developed memory problems, and now this. You're using a kidnapped child as bait, she whispered. I'm preventing a larger tragedy. The Volkov organization has been trafficking children across the Pacific Northwest for 3 years. Emma Schwarzenegger's kidnapping was facilitated to draw them into the open. Dmitri was watching her face with growing satisfaction. He could see the recognition, the dawning horror. He knew she was remembering another operation, another child used as collateral damage in Webb's larger game. The girl doesn't know, Maggie said. Of course not. Her terror is what makes it convincing. Webb's voice carried no trace of remorse. Just like the Caldwell children didn't know they were being used to flush out their father's co-conspirators. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. The satellite phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in Maggie's hand. Emma's face flashed through her mind. The genuine fear, the desperate clutching of that photograph, the way she'd pressed against Maggie's legs for protection. Where are you, Marcus? Closer than you think. And Maggie? This time, follow orders. Don't let your conscience interfere with operational necessity. We both know how that ended last time. The line went dead. Dmitri extended his hand with mock courtesy. The child, Miss Chen. Our employer is waiting. Maggie looked at the 3 men, then at the silent phone in her hand. 8 years ago, she'd trusted Webb and 3 children had died. Now he was asking her to trust him again. She thought of Emma, hidden behind the rocky outcrop, with nothing but a ranger's emergency beacon and her own fragile courage. No, Maggie said quietly. Then she pressed her radio's emergency beacon and drew her weapon. The clearing erupted into chaos the moment Maggie's finger found the trigger. Dmitri dove left as her first shot splintered bark inches from his head. The tattooed man was already moving, his own weapon appearing with practiced ease. Only the 3rd man hesitated, a split second of confusion that cost him his position as Maggie rolled behind the nearest Douglas fir. Don't kill her! Dmitri's voice cracked like a whip through the gunfire. Webb wants her alive! The mention of Webb's name sent ice through Maggie's veins even as bullets chewed bark above her head. 8 years of fighting forest fires and tracking lost hikers hadn't prepared her for this, the terrible clarity that came with being hunted again. Her hands shook as she checked her ammunition. 15 rounds, 3 men, 40 minutes until backup arrived, assuming anyone was even monitoring the emergency frequency this deep in the mountains. She closed her eyes and forced herself to think like the negotiator she'd once been. What did Webb really want? Emma was bait, that much was clear. But bait for whom? The Volkov organization, according to Webb, but Dmitri and his men were working for Webb, which made Emma bait for someone else entirely. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Maggie could hear her own ragged breathing and the distant sound of the emergency beacon's electronic pulse. Somewhere beyond the rocky outcrop, Emma was listening to this firefight and learning that the adult world was even more dangerous than she'd imagined. Miss Chen, Dmitri's voice came from behind a cluster of boulders 20 feet away. You're making this harder than necessary. We simply need the girl for a few hours. Then everyone goes home safely, like the Caldwell children went home safely. The words tore from Maggie's throat before she could stop them. A pause. Then, you remember. Good. Then you understand what happens when you interfere with federal operations. Federal operations. The phrase made her stomach clench. 8 years ago, she'd believed Webb when he'd labeled the Caldwell rescue a federal operation. She'd believed him when he'd said the intelligence was solid, the plan foolproof. She'd even believed him during the congressional hearings when he'd testified that Agent Chen had acted outside protocol. that her unauthorized modifications to the rescue plan had resulted in civilian casualties. 3 children, ages 6, 8, and 10, dead because she'd trusted Marcus Webb. Now he was asking her to trust him again. The satellite phone buzzed against her hip, a text message. With trembling fingers, she checked the screen. Girl's father never reported her missing. Think about that. M.W. Maggie's blood turned to ice. If Victor Schwarzenegger hadn't reported his daughter's kidnapping, then either he didn't know she was gone or the father's involved, she whispered. Another text, Hollywood debt to wrong people. Daughter is collateral. You're interfering with justice. Justice. Webb's favorite word, the one he'd used to justify every moral compromise, every acceptable loss. But if Emma's own father had given her to these men as payment for some debt, then the photograph, the terror, the desperate flight through the woods. Think, Chen, she hissed to herself. The photo had been too perfect, but Emma's fear was absolutely real. A child couldn't fake that level of trauma, couldn't manufacture the kind of terror Maggie had seen in those eyes, unless she'd been conditioned to it. The thought hit her like a physical blow. What if Emma had been living with this fear for weeks, months? What if the men hunting her weren't kidnappers but collectors, and she'd finally found the courage to run? Movement caught her eye. The third man, circling wide through the underbrush, trying to flank her position. Professional tactics, military precision. These weren't simple criminals. They were contractors, operators, the kind of men who worked in the shadows between legal and necessary. The kind of men Webb preferred to use. Her radio crackled to life. All units. Emergency beacon activated in Sector 7. Ranger Chen, please respond. Maggie grabbed the radio, then stopped. If she responded, she'd have to explain why she was pinned down by gunfire, why she'd drawn her weapon, why 3 men were hunting an 8-year-old girl through the forest. She'd have to mention Emma, and Webb would be monitoring those transmissions. Instead, she keyed the mic 3 times. The old FBI code for under duress, maintain radio silence. If anyone remembered the old protocols, they'd understand. If not, she was on her own. Time's running out, Miss Chen, Dmitri called. His voice was closer now, maybe 15 feet. Our employer is not patient man, and little girl must be getting very frightened, yes? Emma, hidden behind the rocks, listening to gunshots and adult voices discussing her like property. Whatever web of lies surrounded her kidnapping, the child herself was innocent, real, terrified. Maggie made her choice. She pressed the radio's emergency override and spoke quickly. Federal agents compromised. Child in immediate danger. Trust no one claiming jurisdiction. Then she threw the radio aside and prepared to fight.